Greetings, one and all, once again to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast, and I am your host, Jackson, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of the Smith of Wootton Major here, just because I figured that two-parters for this story would be enough, and then we'll jump right back into the Silmarillion. So I thought that would be a decent plan, I think, at the very least. And for me to actually introduce video format, which is should be up soon, pretty soon. I'm trying to get the earlier episodes published, but also the video one, just for you guys to see how it's gonna look like in the future. Especially since these episodes are between 30 and 50 minutes. It's not terribly hard to put background music and whatnot. So yeah, and I guess if there's any new listeners, Exploring Arda is pretty much me going throughout Tolkien's works aside from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I started with the Silmarillion, and now I'm finishing up Smith of Wootton Major. So yeah, I read through half of the story, and I think it was about a week ago when I recorded it, I think, or somewhere around there. But what I can remember is that there was a great cake in Wootton Major, which is the whole 25 feast and whatnot, and or 24 or 25. Let me see here. Well, it's one of the 20s, I think. But so there was a big feast, and it's all about the children pretty much getting prizes and tokens and whatnot. And eventually there's this kid who pretty much swallowed it whole, and then when it came back up, then he pretty much slapped it on his head, and then he had this enhanced abilities pretty much. So it was interesting. And then now he got introductions into Faery, the fairyland, and all sorts of things, and his skills pretty much improve a whole lot. And along his journeys throughout Faery, there's apparently he had a guide, like what I said last time, and now he's on his own pretty much. And when he was on his own, there was some scary stuff that happened, and then he didn't go back for a long time until now, which is pretty much where we left off. If I remember, there was a wind that pretty much acted like its own entity, and there was a branch that's pretty much told him not to go away, or not to go away. There you go, to go away and not to return. There you go, that's it. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So with all that being said, I think we're gonna go back to the story. All right, let's go. All right. At last he found a road through the outer mountains, and he went on till he came to the inner mountains, and they were high and sheer and daunting. Yet in the end he found a pass that he could scale, and upon a day of days greatly daring, he came through a narrow cleft, and looked down, though he did not know it, into the vale of Evermorn, where the green surpasses the green of the meads of outer Faery, as they surpass ours in our springtime. There the air is so lucid that eyes can see the red tongues of birds as they sing on the trees upon the far side of the valley, though that is very wide, and the birds are no greater than wrens. On the inner side the mountains went down in long slopes, filled with the sound of bubbling waterfalls, and in great delight he hastened on. As he set foot upon the grass of the vale, he had heard elven voices singing, and on a lawn beside a river bright with lilies, he came upon many maidens dancing. The speed and the grace and the ever-changing modes of their movements enchanted him, and he stepped forward towards their ring. Then suddenly they stood still, and a young maiden with flowing hair and a kilted skirt came out to meet him. She laughed as she spoke to him, saying, "You are becoming bold, Starbrow, are you not? Have you no fear of what the queen might say if she knew of this? Unless you have her leave." He was abashed, for he became aware of his own thought, and knew that she read it, that the star on his forehead was a passport to go wherever he wished. And now he knew that it was not. But she smiled as she spoke again. "Come, now that you are here, you shall dance with me." And she took his hand and led him into the ring. There they danced together, and for a while he knew what it was to have the swiftness and the power and the joy to accompany her. For a while. But soon it seemed that they halted again, and she stooped and took up a white flower from before her feet and set it in his hair. "Farewell now," she said. "Maybe we shall meet again, by the queen's leave." He remembered nothing of the journey home from that meeting until he found himself riding along the roads in his own country, and in some villages people stared at him in wonder and watched him till he rode out of sight. I'll actually stop like right here, just because this seems to be his, I guess, passing of Faery that, pretty much, it feels like his journey is coming to an end, kind of, because he finds, I guess, the natives of Faery, which actually are elves, I suppose. And again, I actually haven't read this before or read any notes. This is all just guesses on my part. Yeah, so apparently there's like a queen, an elven queen perhaps, because these are all elven maidens in this ring. I guess they're all dancing and singing, and then they pretty much tell him to join them, and then they're like, oh yeah, well, we already know about all of your star power. He just goes wherever he wants to in Faery, so... but I guess when he leaves, it's kind of like a maybe we'll see him, maybe we'll not. It's a complete guess, because I'm assuming the people in Faery have seen other travelers before, especially since it's like each star seemed to be handed down one way or another to each person. So I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe the elves have already known about humans, and they're like, okay, well, here's another guy. Maybe we'll see him. Maybe we'll not. So I don't know. Just my guesses here. Alright, back to the story here. When he came to his own house, his daughter ran out and greeted him with delight. He had returned sooner than what was expected, but none too soon for those that awaited him. "Daddy," she cried, "where have you been? Your star is shining bright." But when he crossed the threshold, the star dimmed again. But Nell took him by the hand and led him to the hearth, and there she turned and looked at him. "Dear man," she said, "where have you been, and what have you seen? There is a flower in your hair." She lifted it gently from his head, and it lay on her hand. It seemed like a thing seen from a great distance, yet there it was, and a light came from it that cast shadows on the walls of the room, now growing dark in the evening. The shadow of the man before her loomed up, and its great head was bowed over her. "You look like a giant, Dad," said his son, who had not spoken before. The flower did not wither, nor grow dim, and they kept it as a secret and a treasure. The smith made a little casket with a key for it, and there it lay, and was handed down for many generations in his kin. And those who inherited the key would at times open the casket and look long at the living flower, till the casket closed again. The time of its shutting was not theirs to choose. Okay, so this is really interesting. Cool. So this flower that the elven maiden gives him is actually kind of like a memento, I suppose, of Faery, that he decides to keep, and it's pretty much an heirloom. It almost becomes an heirloom of like his family, where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna pass down this flower, keep it hidden, keep it secret, keep it safe. The whole thing of Lord of the Rings. It's pretty much that, except it's a flower instead of a ring of power. But it's pretty cool. It's like a living flower that just lasts for years and years and years, even in this like tiny little casket. It says little casket with a little key. It's really cool. I like that. And it just says a casket. I wonder what they decorated it with. Perhaps maybe like the father remembered like what the fields look like or the trees, and then he like carved it into something. It just kind of thoughts that I had was like, oh, maybe he did that. I don't know. It doesn't really say. No. I mean, what was it, a black casket? I think it was. I think it just says a little casket. Yeah. But either way, just my imagination kind of flowing, drifting out there into the ether of what it might be. So, well, I don't know. Maybe. Well, let's just get back to the story. How about that? The years did not halt in the village. Many now had passed. At the children's feast, when he received the star, the smith was not yet 10 years old. Then came, it was 24, not 25. Then came another 24 feast, by which time Alf had become master cook, and had chosen a new apprentice, Harper. 12 years later the smith had returned with the living flower, and now another children's 24 feast was due in the winter to come. One day in that year, Smith was walking in the woods of Outer Faery, and it was autumn. Golden leaves were on the boughs, and red leaves were on the ground. Was it boughs or bows? English is weird. Footsteps came behind him, but he did not heed them or turn around, for he was deep in thought. On that visit he had received a summons and had made a far journey. Longer it seemed to him than any he had yet to make. He was guided and guarded, but he had little memory of the ways that he had taken, for often he had been blindfolded by mist or by shadow, until at last he came to a high place under a night sky of innumerable stars. There he was brought before the queen herself. She wore no crown and had no throne. She stood there in her majesty and her glory, and all about her was a great host shimmering and glittering like the stars above. But she was taller than the points of their great spears, and upon her head there burned a white flame. She made a sign for him to approach, and trembling he stepped forward. A high, clear trumpet sounded, and behold, they were alone. He stood before her, and he did not kneel in courtesy, for he was dismayed, and felt that for one so lowly all gestures were in vain. At length he looked up and beheld her face, and her eyes bent gravely upon him, and he was troubled and amazed, for in that moment he knew her again, the fair maiden of the green veil, the dancer at whose feet the flowers sprang. She smiled, seeing his memory, and drew towards him, and they spoke long together, for the most part without words, and he learned many things in her thought, some of which gave him joy, and others filled him with grief. Then his mind turned back, retracing his life, until he came to the day of the children's feast, and the coming of the star. And suddenly he saw again the little dancing figure with its wand, and in shame he lowered his eyes from the queen's beauty. I'm going to stop there, actually, right? I keep stopping a whole lot in this episode, just because there's a lot that actually is really cool with this second half, actually, which is, it works out in my end. So he comes back, because there's a summons, and this is probably when he's a lot older, obviously, because Alf is now head cook, I think it is, master cook, yeah, master cook. And now he's in a summons of the queen herself, and it turns out it's the maiden, pretty much. Really cool. And I do like the idea, the concept of sharing conversations and thoughts literally telepathically. That's kind of like what they're doing in this part. It does remind me, I know I don't want to keep retracing back to Lord of the Rings, but it reminds me of Galadriel and how she pretty much is able to speak and look into people's minds, which is, I mean, that's a really cool power to have. And it just kind of reminded me of that a little bit. So that's why when I read it for the first time, I'm like, is this like another crossover again? Like Galadriel is actually this, I mean, she's elven, obviously, and I'm sure at one time she was, I mean, maybe a elven maiden, sure. But, I mean, she does become queen. I don't know. It's just interesting how a lot of these characters kind of line up like that. But just a really cool telepathic moment there between the two characters. So, yeah, with that all being said, too, we're going to go back to her. But she laughed again, as she had laughed in the Vale of Evermorn. "Do not be grieved for me, Starbrow," she said, "nor too much ashamed of your own folk. Better a little dull, maybe, than no memory of Faery at all. For some the only glimpse, for some the awaking. Ever since that day you have desired in your heart to see me, and I have granted your wish. But I can give you no more. Now at farewell I will make you my messenger. If you meet the king, say to him, the time has come, let him choose." "But, Lady of the Faery," he stammered, "where then is the king?" For he had asked this question many times of the people of Faery, and they had all said the same, "He has not told us." And the queen answered, "If he has not told you, Starbrow, then I may not. But he makes many journeys, and may be met in unlikely places. Now kneel of your courtesy." And then he knelt, and she stooped and laid her hand on his head, and a great stillness came upon him, and he seemed to be both in the world and in Faery, and also outside them and surveying them, so that he was at once in bereavement, and in ownership and in peace. When after a while the stillness passed, he raised his head and stood up. The dawn was in the sky, and the stars were pale, and the queen was gone. Far off he heard the echo of a trumpet in the mountains. The high field where he stood was silent and empty, and he knew that his way now led back to bereavement. That meeting place was now far behind him, and here he was, walking among the fallen leaves, pondering all that he had seen and learned. The footsteps came nearer. Then suddenly a voice said at his side, "Are you going my way, Starbrow?" He started and came out of his thoughts, and he saw a man beside him. He was tall, and he walked lightly and quickly. He was dressed all in dark green, and wore a hood that partly overshadowed his face. The smith was puzzled, for only the people of Faery called him Starbrow, but he could not remember ever seeing this man there before, and yet he felt uneasily that he should know him. "What way are you going, then?" he said. "I'm going back to your village now," the man answered, "and I hope that you also are returning." "I am indeed," said the smith. "Let us walk together. But now something has come back to my mind. Before I began my homeward journey, a great lady gave me a message, but we shall soon be passing from Faery, and I do not think I shall ever return. Will you?" "Yes, I shall. You may give the message to me." "But the message was to the king. Do you know where to find him?" "I do. What was the message?" "The lady only asked me to say to him, 'The time has come. Let him choose.'" "I understand. Trouble yourself no further." Sorry for the page turning effects. They went on then, side by side in silence, save for the rustle of the leaves about their feet. But after a few miles, while they were still within the bound of Faery, the man halted. He turned towards the smith and threw back his hood. Then the smith knew him. Oh, it was Elf the Prentice, as the smith still called him in his own mind, remembering always the day when as a youth, Elf had stood in the hall, holding the bright knife for the cutting of the cake, and his eyes had gleamed in the light of the candles. He must be an old man now, for he had been master cook for many years, but here, standing under the eaves of the outer wood, he looked like the apprentice of long ago, though more masterly. There was no gray in his hair, nor line on his face, and his eyes gleamed as if they reflected a light. Alright, a little pause here again. Okay, yeah, that's that's a surprise that I actually know. Okay, so apparently, this hidden man that he just all of a sudden is, now he's there, is Alf. So apparently Alf knows all about. Actually, it makes sense because in the first part he is upset with the first master cook that we're introduced to, because he starts making fun of fairy folk and he's like, it's not real, all that stuff. "Oh, fairy folk, that's nonsense." That's that sort of stuff. I kind of forgot his voice. Okay, yeah. So I guess Elf is an elf. I think. Either he's an elf or he's an actual fairy, which I think it's the land of Faery, and the elves are the occupants of Faery. That's kind of what I get now. I just get so confused sometimes. Yeah, I don't know. This was very surprising. If Alf is like the king, maybe that'd be kind of cool. Because I mean, he like walks between Faery and the, I guess, regular world. So I'm assuming, since Alf knows his way in Faery, that he knows the ways back and forth, that he's the king. I feel like. I don't know. We'll see. So we'll see, because we'll go back to the book here. All right. Well, actually, gotta make sure I got all this set up here. Okay, now we're good. "I should like to speak to you, Smithson." I don't like that. That's okay. Anyway, "I should like to speak to you, Smithson, before we go back to your country," he said. The smith wondered at that, for he himself had often wished to talk to Alf, but he had never been able to do so. Alf had always greeted him kindly and had looked at him with friendly eyes, but had seemed to avoid talking to him alone. He was now looking at the smith with friendly eyes, but he lifted his hand and with his forefinger touched the star on his brow. The gleam left his eyes, and then the smith knew that it had come from the star, and that it must have been shining brightly, but now was dimmed. He was surprised and drew away angrily. "Do you not think, Master Smith," said Alf, "that it is time for you to give this thing up?" "What is that to you, Master Cook?" he answered. "And why should I do so? Isn't it mine? It came to me, and may a man not keep things that come to him, so at the least as a remembrance?" "Some things, those that are free gifts and given for remembrance, but others are not so given. They cannot belong to a man forever, nor be treasured as heirlooms. They are lent. You have not thought, perhaps, that someone else may need this thing, but it is so. Time is pressing." Then the smith was troubled, for he was a generous man, and he remembered with gratitude all the star that had brought to him. "Then what should I do?" he asked. "Should I give it to one of the great in Faery? Should I give it to the king?" And as he said this, a hope sprang in his heart that on such an errand he might once more enter Faery. "You could give it to me," said Alf, "but you might find that too hard. Will you come with me to my storeroom and put it back in the box where your grandfather laid it?" "I did not know that," said the smith. Oops, sorry. Actually, for the viewers, see, all these pictures, pretty much, is what I have to go over. Sometimes they're like full art, and sometimes they're like one page. It's kind of disruptive to the story. I know, it is the way, I guess. Back here again. No one knew but me. I was the only one with him. Then I suppose that you know how he came by the star, and why he put it in the box? He brought it from Faery. That you know without asking, Alf answered. He left it behind in the hope that it might come to you, his only grandchild. So he told me, there you go. So he told me, for he thought that I could arrange that. He was your mother's father. I do not know whether she told you much about him, if indeed she knew much to tell. Ryder was his name, and he was a great traveler. He had seen many things and can do many things before he settled down and became master cook. But he went away when you were only 2 years old, and they could find no one better to follow him than Noakes, poor man. Still, as we expected, I became master in time. This year I shall make another great cake, the only cook, as far as it is remembered, ever to make a second one. I wish to put the star in it. Very well, you shall have it, said the smith. He looked at Alf as if he was trying to read his thoughts. Do you know who will find it? What is that to you, Master Smith? I should like to know if you do, Master Cook. It might make it easier for me to part with the thing so dear to me. My daughter's child is too young. It might, and it might not. We shall see, said Alf. So I guess now, Smith is realizing that he's probably not going to come back, and the star's not going to belong to him anymore. So he wants, since Alf knows all about it, and he recognizes the truth about him, that pretty much Alf is like, listen, I'm making another cake, so if you want to give it away, it's pretty much how you found it in the first place, which makes total sense. So he's like, okay, understandable, but I want you to give it to a specific person. And Alpha's like, yeah, we'll see about that. So a quick little recap there, because I'm going to try to finish it off in this episode, hopefully. So back to it here. They said no more, and they went on their way until they passed out of Faery and came back at last to the village. Then they walked to the hall, and in the world the sun was now setting, and a red light was in the windows. The gilded carvings on the great door glowed, and strange faces of many colors looked down from the waterspouts under the roof. Not long ago the hall had been reglazed and repainted, and there had been much debate on the council about it. Some disliked it and called it new-fangled, but some with more knowledge knew that it was a return to old custom. Still, since it had cost no one a penny, and the master cook must have paid for it himself, he was allowed to make his own way. But the smith had not seen it in such a light before, and he stood and looked at the hall in wonder, forgetting his errand. He felt a touch on his arm, and Alf led him round to a small door in the back. He opened it and led the smith down a dark passage into the storeroom. There he lit a tall candle and unlocked a cupboard he took down from a shelf the black box. It was polished now. I mix up the words. It was polished now and adorned with silver scrolls. He raised the lid and showed it to the smith. One small compartment was empty. The others were now filled with spices, fresh and pungent, and the smith's eyes began to water. He put his hand to his forehead, and the star came away readily, but he felt a sudden stab of pain, and tears ran down his face. Though the star shone brightly again as it lay in his hand, he could not see it, except as a blurred dazzle of light that seemed far away. Okay. Actually, no, we'll continue here. I cannot see clearly, he said. You must put it in for me. He held out his hand, and Elf took the star and laid it in his place, and it went dark. The smith turned away without another word and groped his way to the door. On the threshold he found that his sight had cleared again. It was evening, and the even star was shining in a luminous sky close to the moon. As he stood for a moment looking at their beauty, he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned. You gave me the star freely, said Elf. If you still wish to know to which child it will go, I will tell you. I do indeed. It shall go to any one that you appoint. The smith was taken aback and did not answer at once. Well, he said, hesitating, I wonder what you may think of my choice. I believe you have little reason to love the name of Noakes, but, well, his little great-grandson, Noakes of Townsend's Tim, is coming to the feast. Noakes of Townsend is quite different. I have observed that, said Elf. He had a wise mother. Yes, my Nell's sister. But apart from the kinship, I love little Tim, though he's not an obvious choice. Alf smiled. Neither were you, he said. But I agree. Indeed, I had already chosen Tim. Then why did you ask me to choose? The queen wished me to do so. If you had chosen differently, I should have given away. The smith looked long at Elf, then suddenly he bowed low. I understand at last, sir, he said. You have done us too much honor. I have been repaid, said Elf. Go home now, in peace. Now I can stop here. Alright, so now it's finally the whole surrender of the star. He's finally let it go. And it's cool that it makes sense that when he takes it out of his head, which sounds kind of funny, but when it plops down in his hand, then his vision instantly just goes like terrible. And he found it in the storeroom where it originally was. So it only makes sense that the power, I guess, or whatever it has, is the strongest in that area. So whenever he takes it out, then obviously all of the senses go terrible. But since he willingly gave it up, Elf pretty much respects him, is what I'm getting at. Elf is like, okay, well, you did this on your own accord. You took it out, and now you gave it to me. So now you can pretty much know who's gonna get it next. And apparently this Tim guy is next in line. So pretty interesting. So let's get back to it here. When the smith reached his house on the western outskirts of the village, he found his son by the door of the forge. He had just locked it, for the day's work was done, and now he stood looking upon the white road by which his father used to return from his journeys. Hearing footsteps, he turned in surprise to see him coming from the village, and he ran forward to meet him. He put his arms around him in loving welcome. "I've been hoping for you since yesterday, Dad," he said. Then looking into his father's face, he said anxiously, "How tired you look. You have walked far, maybe?" "Very far indeed, my son, all the way from daybreak to evening." They went into the house together, and it was dark except for the fire flickering on the hearth. His son lit candles, and for a while they sat by the fire without speaking, for a great weariness and bereavement was on the smith. At last he looked round as if coming to himself, and he said, "Why are we alone?" His son looked hard at him. "Why? Mother's over at Minor, at Nan's. It's the little lad's 2nd birthday. They hoped you would be there too." "Ah, yes, I ought to have been. I should have been, Ned, but I was delayed. And I have had matters to think of all that put us out of mind for a time. But I did not forget Tomling." He put his hand in his breast and drew out a little wallet of soft leather. "I have brought him something. A trinket old Noakes maybe could call it, but it comes out of Faery, Ned." Out of the wallet he took a little thing of silver. It was like the smooth stem of a tiny lily, from the top of which came 3 delicate flowers, bending down like shapely bells. And bells they were, for when he shook them gently, each flower rang with a small clear note. At the sweet sound the candles flickered, and then for a moment shone with a white light. Ned's eyes were wide with wonder. "May I look at it, Dad?" he said. He took it with careful fingers and peered into the flowers. "The work is a marvel," he said. "And, Dad, there is a scent in the bells, a scent that reminds me, of something I've forgotten." "Yes, the scent comes for a little while after the bells have rung. But don't fear to handle it, Ned. It was made for a babe to play with. He can do it no harm, and he'll take none from it." The smith put the gift back in the wallet and stowed it away. "I'll take it over to Wootten Major myself tomorrow," he said. "Ned and her Tom and Mother will forgive me, maybe. As for Tomling, his time has not come yet for the counting of days, and of weeks, and of months, and of years." "That's right, Dad. That's right. You go, Dad. I'll be glad to go with you. But it will be some time before I can get over to Minor. I couldn't have gone today, even if I hadn't waited here for you. There's a lot of work in hand, and more coming in." No, Smith's son. Make it a holiday. The name of grandfather hasn't weakened my arms yet a while. Let the work come. There'll be 2 pairs of hands to tackle it now, all working days. "I shall not be going on journeys again, Ned. Not on long ones, if you understand me." Isn't that way... No, I messed up here. Oh, sorry. Isn't that way, is it? It's that way, is it? Yeah, hold on. Okay, sorry, guys. Got a little, what would I call it? Not a really disturbance, but just like a quick, my wife came in for a little bit, so I'm like, okay, well, pause it really quick. We'll we'll go back to it here. So, in the middle of a conversation here. No, but we're all good. So hopefully it's only like a split second of delay. But back to the story here, because we're in dialogue here. And I was stumbling over the words, which is terrible. As a narrator, I'm terrible. I'm very terrible at narrating, so I'm trying to do better, guys. I really am. So, I'll go back to it here. It's that way, is it, Dad? There you go, see? I wondered what had become of the star. That's hard. He took his father's hand. I'm grieved for you, but there's good in it, too, for this house. Do you know, Master Smith, there is much you can teach me yet, if you have the time. And I do not mean only the working of iron. They had supper together, and long after they had finished they still sat at the table, while the smith told the son of his last journey in Faery, and of other things that came to his mind. But about the choice of the next holder of the star he said nothing. At last his son looked at him and said, Father, he said, do you remember the day when you came back with the flower? And I said that you looked like a giant by your shadow. The shadow was the truth, so it was the queen herself that you danced with. Yet you have given up the star. I hope it may go to someone as worthy. The child should be grateful. The child won't know, said the smith. That's the way with such gifts. Well, there it is. I have handed it on and come back to hammer and tongs. Okay, so now we can actually stop and regroup ourselves here. So yeah, he comes home and he sees his son, and they're he's really happy to see him again. Kind of back to ordinary life, and he realizes that even though he definitely misses Faery, and he's going to miss Faery, that he still has a whole lot left to do with his family, wife, kids, all that stuff. And even his son is just well, I know that you gave up the star, it was really cool, it was really magical, but you still have the flowers that I guess I'm assuming they're still there with him. And it's that Faery heirloom is okay, well, you at least have this and not the star, and the star is going to go to somebody else that's pretty much worthy of it. So it's kind of what I'm getting at, or the book is getting at, I'm assuming. So yeah, pretty cool. I kind of like that. Kind of return to normalcy, and he's fine with it. At least it seems that way. At least I think so. So back to it here. It is a strange thing, but old Noakes, who had scoffed at his apprentice, had never been able to put out of his mind the disappearance of the star and the cake, although that event had happened so many years ago. He had grown fat and lazy, and retired from his office when he was 60, no great age in the village. He was now near the end of his 80s, and was of enormous bulk, for he still ate heavily and doted on sugar. Most of his days, when not at table, he spent in a big chair by the window of his cottage, or by the door if it was fine weather. He liked talking, since he still had many opinions to air, but lately his talk mostly turned to the one great cake that he had made, as he was now firmly convinced, for whenever he fell asleep and came into his dreams, Prentice sometimes stopped for a word or two. So the old cook still called him, and he expected himself to be called master. That apprentice was careful to do, which was a fair point in his favor, though there were others that Noakes was more fond of. One afternoon Noakes was nodding in his chair by the door after his dinner. He awoke with a start to find Prentice standing by and looking at him. "Hello," he said. "I'm glad to see you, for that cake's been on my mind again. I was thinking of it just now, in fact. It was the best cake I ever made, and that's saying something. But perhaps you have forgotten it." "No, master, I remember it very well. But what is troubling you? It was a good cake, and it was enjoyed and praised." "Of course, I made it. But that doesn't trouble me. It's the little trinket, the star. I cannot make up my mind what became of it. Of course it wouldn't melt. I only said that to stop the children from being frightened. I have wondered if one of them did not swallow it. But is that likely? You might swallow one of those little coins and not notice it. But not that star. It was small, but it had sharp points." I think that's what I said too. Sharp points on the star. I'm like, that only makes sense. You could totally feel that. I don't know. I thought that was my thought for that. Back to it here. "Yes, master, but do you really know what the star was made of? Don't trouble your mind about it. Someone swallowed it, I assure you." "Then who? Well, I've a long memory, and that day sticks in somehow. I can recall all the children's names. Let me think. It must have been Miller's Molly. She was greedy and bolted her food. She's as fat as a sack now." Yes, there are some folk who get like that, master, but Molly did not bolt her cake. She found 2 trinkets inside her slice.
Oh, did she? Well, it was Cooper's Harry, then. A barrel of a boy with a big mouth like a frog's.
I should have said, master, that he was a nice boy with a large, friendly grin. Anyway, he was so careful that he took his slice to pieces before he ate it. He found nothing but cake.
Then it must have been that little pale girl, Draper's Lily. She used to swallow pins as a baby and came to no harm.
Not Lily, master. She only ate the paste and the sugar and gave the inside to the boy that sat next to her.
Then I give up. Who was it? Who seemed to have been watching very closely? If you're not making it all up.
It was Smith's son, master, and I think it was good for him.
Go on, laughed Old Noakes. I ought to have known you were having a game with me. Don't be ridiculous. Smith was a quiet boy then. Smith was a quite slow boy then. He makes more noise now. Bit of a songster, I hear, but he's cautious. No risks for him. Chews twice before he swallows, and always did, if you take my meaning.
I do, master. Well, if you don't believe me it was Smith, I can't help you. Perhaps it doesn't matter much now. Will it ease your mind if I tell you that the star is back in the box now? Here it is. Prentice was wearing a dark green cloak, which Noakes now noticed for the first time. From its fold, he produced the black box and opened it under the under the old cook's nose. Wow, crook. No, that's totally different. It was a black box. Okay, just to like a recap, I thought it was a black box. Okay, there's the star, master, down in the corner. Old Noakes began coughing and sneezing, but at last he looked into the box.
So it is, he said. At least it looks it.
It is the same one, master. I put it there myself a few days ago. It will go back in the great cake this winter.
Aha!
said Noakes, leering at Prentice, and then he laughed till he shook like a jelly. That's really funny, actually.
I see. 24 children and 24 lucky bites, and the star was 1 extra. So you nipped it out before the baking and kept it for another time. You were always a tricky fellow, nimble one might say, and thrifty. Wouldn't waste a bee's knee of butter. Ha ha! So that was the way of it. I might have guessed. Well, that's cleared up. Now we can have a nap in peace.
He settled down in his chair.
Mind that Prentice man of yours plays you no tricks. The artful don't know all the arts, they say.
He closed his eyes. Goodbye, master, said Prentice, shutting the box with such a snap that the cook opened his eyes again. Noakes, he said, your knowledge is so great that I have only twice ventured to tell you anything. Oh, sorry. I got distracted there. I told you that the star came from Faery, and I have told you that it went to the smith. You laughed at me. Now at parting I will tell you one more thing. Don't laugh again. You are a vain old fraud, fat, idle, and sly. I did most of your work. Without thanks, you learned all that you could from me, except respect for Faery and a little courtesy. You have not even enough to bid me good day.
If it comes to courtesy, said Noakes, I see none in calling your elders and betters by ill names. Take your Faery and your nonsense somewhere else. Good day to you, if that's what you're waiting for. Now go along with you.
He flapped his hands mockingly.
If you've got one of your Faery friends hidden in the kitchen, send him to me, and I'll have a look at him. If he waves his little wand and makes me thin again, I'll think better of him. He laughed.
Would you spare a few moments for the king of Faery? The other answered. To Noakes' dismay, he grew taller as he spoke. He threw back his cloak. He was dressed like a master cook at a feast, but his white garments shimmered and glinted, and on his forehead was a great jewel like a radiant star. His face was young but stern. Old man, he said, you are at least not my elder. As to my better, you have often sneered at me behind my back. Do you challenge me now openly? He stepped forward, and Noakes shrank from him, trembling. He tried to shout for help, but found that he could hardly whisper.
No, sir, he croaked. Don't do me no harm. I'm only a poor old man.
The king... Oh, okay. Sorry. The king's face softened.
Alas, yes, you speak the truth.
Do not be afraid. Be at ease. But will you not expect the king of Faery to do something for you before he leaves you? I grant you your wish. Farewell. Now go to sleep. He wrapped his cloak around him again and went away towards the hall. But before he was out of sight, the old cook's goggling eyes had shut, and he was snoring. Interesting. Okay, and I kind of figured that that Alf, I guess, was the king, because I'm like, it makes sense, because he can walk both paths. He knows the ways of the forest. He wants to make sure that the star goes to people that he knows that he can trust, like, for sure. And this is kind of like a little revenge conversation between Noakes and him, because Noakes was very, like, totally against Faery, obviously, like I stated. But, I was like, I knew it. I knew that he was going to become the king, somehow. And it's really cool. Like, he's, like, it makes sense. He's in disguise, because it's, between Faery and, I guess, the human world. Of course he's going to be in disguise, and he's going to be young, because he's elves. Like, he's part of the elves. And for Tolkien, elves are always just, like, pretty much immortal, but I don't know about this story. I don't know if it tracks with, like, elven immortality and whatnot, but I'm assuming it does, but I don't know. Okay, back to it here. When the old cook woke again, the sun was going down. He rubbed his eyes and shivered a little, for the autumn air was chilly.
"Oh, what a dream," he said.
He said, sorry.
"It must have been that pork at dinner."
From that day he became so afraid of having more bad dreams of that sort that he hardly dared eat anything for fear that it might upset him, and his meals became very short and plain. He soon became lean, and his clothes and his skin hung on him in folds and creases. Ooh, that's kind of gross. The children called him Old Rag Bones.
Yeah, the Old Rag Bones. Nice. Want to go over to the Old Rag Bones place? Oh, I hear that's haunted.
That's kind of funny, actually. Then for a time he found that he could get about the village again and walk with no more help than a stick, and he lived many years longer than he would otherwise have done. Indeed, it is said that he just made his century. Wow. The only memorable thing he ever achieved. But till his last year he could be heard saying to any that would listen to his tale,
"Alarming, you might call it, but a silly dream when you come to think of it. King of Faery. Why, he hadn't no wand, and if you stop eating, you grow thinner. That's natural. Stands to reason. There ain't no magic in it."
The time for the 24 feast came round. Smith was there to sing songs, and his wife to help with the children. Smith looked at them as they sang and danced, and he thought that they were more beautiful and lively than they had been in his boyhood. For a moment it crossed his mind to wonder what Alf might have been doing in his spare time. Any one of them seemed to fit to find the star, but his eyes were mostly on Tim, a rather plump little boy, clumsy in the dances, but with a sweet voice in the singing. At table he sat silent, watching the sharpening of the knife and the cutting of the cake. Suddenly he piped up. Dear Mr. Cook, only cut me a small slice, please. I've eaten so much already, I feel rather full." "All right, Tim," said Alf. "I'll cut you a special slice. I think you'll find it go down easy." Smith watched as Tim ate his cake slowly, but with evident pleasure, though when he found no trinket or coin in it, he looked disappointed. But soon a light began to shine. I don't know why I said shimmer. A light began to shine in his eyes, and he laughed and became merry, and sang softly to himself. Then he got up and began to dance, all alone, with an odd grace that he had never shown before. The children all laughed and clapped. "All is well, then," thought Smith. "So you are my heir. I wonder what strange places the star will lead you to. Poor old Noakes. Still, I suppose he will never know what a shocking thing has happened in his family. And we're almost there. We're almost to the end here. So, close." He never did. But one thing happened at that feast that pleased him mightily. Before it was over, the master cook took leave of the children and all the others that were present. "I will say good-bye now," he said. "In a day or two I shall be going away. Master Harper is quite ready to take over. He is a very good cook, and as you know, he comes from your own village. I shall go back home. I do not think you will miss me." The children said good-bye cheerfully and thanked the cook prettily for his beautiful cake. Only little Tim took his hand and said quietly, "I'm sorry." In the village there were in fact several families that did miss Alf for some time. A few of his friends, especially Smith and Harper, grieved at his going, and they kept the hall gilded and painted in memory of Alf. Most people, however, were content. They had had him for a very long time, and were not sorry to have a change. But old Noakes thumped his stick on the floor and said roundly, "He's gone at last, and I'm glad for one I'd never liked him. He was artful, too nimble, you might say." And that's it. All right, so there we go. Not bad, not bad. So pretty much I would say it's like a happy ending in a way. Man. So yeah, pretty much the last part here is Tim receiving the star. So he is the next in line, pretty much. He's gonna be the next adventurer into Faery, I'm assuming. That's kind of what it makes it seem that it's gonna lead into, is that Smith is the one that's like, hey, I know all about Faery, so I'm like, probably take him like one step at a time. And then at the very end, it's Noakes pretty much just still being like that Faery nonsense is like, it's dangerous, and like, it's dangerous, stay away from that stuff, and Elf was a silly person, and I never liked him, and so he pretty much never changes, but Elf made a lasting impression, probably because he's the king, so of course he knows how to like, I guess, appease kind of to the people, where he knows that he can be memorable in that way. Yeah, wow, okay, so our first official side story, which I think I labeled as Tolkien Tales. I kind of want to go with alliteration there, it's pretty cool. Yeah, so that's all done with, so that's pretty cool. So I guess I don't know if I would really have any like actual final thoughts for this story, because I've been doing that throughout the whole story, really. I do like the vibe of the story, because it's very, like, you can tell it's definitely in like a medieval setting, just like a small village. People are very chill, casual about things. Their greatest event is this 24 feasts. The whole village is based on the master cook and his importance, which is like, I mean, I get it. Food's very important. And it's kind of like what surrounds that village. It's really cool. I kind of like that. Definitely small town vibes. And it kind of actually reminds me, because I'm actually from a small town in Iowa, so immediately, like, I was kind of like getting the vibe of it, because I've kind of gotten used to it in a way. So it definitely got me thinking back to like my own small town, which is really cool. And then another thing is that, when he goes into his adventures, I just wonder what he did in Faery, because he had many, many years just exploring without a guide. Obviously, I would say like most of it would be with a guide, because when he came back for these summons with the Queen, he did have guards and stuff like with him, but it's never mentioned like if they were actual elves or if they were just a random like sorted out thing from the Queen herself, which would be cool. And I thought, because it was Faery, I'm assuming it's a very natural place. It would be really cool if there was some sort of druidic power to it, where there's like these I don't even know, just like kind of like mini Ents, little tree people, and like dryads and stuff like that would be really cool. If those were his guards, that'd be pretty cool. Just because, they lead him over to the summoning of the queens. I'm like, I wonder what his what is it? I guess, well, not his guards, but his guide. There you go, his guide. What they were all about. Obviously, not a lot is told, because he starts to remember less and less, each time that he goes there, and then the closer that the star needs to be taken out, it only makes sense that he needs to pass it on. So of course the memory's going to fade and fade, and then the only thing left is that flower. So, which is really cool. But then again, he has to pass it on, and he knows Elf and Faery, so it's kind of confusing for me. Like, because like he remembers not a whole lot, but he still has memories of the land. I don't know. So it's very intriguing for me, definitely. And then the ending, obviously, is a very, like, I feel like it's a happy ending, where Smith is all happy with his family. He's glad to let it go. Glad to let the star go. And he's just happy to have a next kid that he can teach all about it. So I feel like it's a really happy ending. So Yeah, alright. So I definitely enjoyed the story. I'm gonna see what story I'm gonna do next, but I still have a lot of the Silmarillion still to go through. So I guess just wait and see. If you guys do like my Tolkien Tales, I can condense it down to like every 5 chapters of the Silmarillion, and then, or every 5 episodes, and then a Tolkien Tale. I could probably do that because there's a lot more out there. So I guess just schedule-wise, it's kind of all over the place for me. But yeah. So that's the end of Smith of Wootton Major. I hope you guys enjoyed it in all my ridiculous voices. And yeah, with all that being said, just stay tuned for the next episodes. And may the light of Elbereth be with you all.
Farewell!